Three identical faces pressed against rain-streaked glass. Hunger carved into eyes too young to understand why food costs money they don't have. A single father, still healing from his own loss, sees what others walk past every day. He gives them coins, then jackets. Then something inside him breaks when they vanish into the November cold. So he follows them, 30 minutes through deteriorating streets, past abandoned buildings and broken dreams, to a warehouse that shouldn't exist. And what he finds there, dozens of families, invisible to a city that's forgotten how to see them, will change everything he thought he knew about survival, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. This is the story of how noticing three hungry little girls led one man to discover that the heart he thought grief had destroyed was actually capable of. The autumn rain came down in sheets that October afternoon, turning Maple Street into a river of fallen leaves and reflected streetlights. Robert Hayes pulled his worn jacket tighter as he left Morrison's auto shop, his hands still stained with engine grease despite 20 minutes of scrubbing. 12 hours on his feet. His back ached, his shoulders burned, but the overtime pay meant Trevor could have new sneakers before winter hit. That's when he saw them. Three little girls huddled beneath the green awning of Palmer's grocery, so identical they could have been reflections in a mirror. Same dark curls plastered to small foreheads, same threadbare clothes that hung loose on thin frames, same hollow look in their brown eyes as they pressed their faces against the store window. Robert had seen hungry before. He'd lived it himself these past 2 years, since Jennifer died, learning to stretch a pound of ground beef across 4 meals, to make macaroni and cheese a gourmet dinner by adding frozen peas. But this was different. These girls weren't window shopping with childhood wonder. They were studying that glass like scholars reading ancient texts, memorizing the placement of bread loaves and fruit displays with an intensity that made Robert's chest tighten. The smallest one, she couldn't have been more than 6, pointed at something inside. Her lips moved, but Robert couldn't hear the words over the rain's percussion. Her sisters nodded solemnly. Then, with practiced efficiency that spoke of routine, they produced a single granola bar from somewhere in the taller girl's pocket. The girls stared at the money like it was a magic trick. The smallest one's hand trembled as she reached for it, looking to her sister for permission. The leader nodded. "Thank you, mister," the little one whispered, and all 3 voices chorused gratitude before they disappeared through the grocery store's doors, leaving Robert standing in the rain, wondering what he'd just witnessed. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a small kindness in a hard world. Jennifer would have approved. She'd always said that having little meant you understood better what it meant to need. But the next afternoon, there they were again. Same spot, same hungry eyes. And the day after that, by the 4th day, Robert knew their names. Charlotte was the spokeswoman, with a vocabulary too advanced for her 6 years. Violet was the quiet observer, always watching, always aware. Ruby was the youngest by 7 minutes and still held on to flickers of childhood wonder that her sisters had lost somewhere along the way. "Mr. Hayes," Ruby called out when she spotted him that Thursday, her face lighting up with genuine joy. It struck Robert how rare joy seemed in her expression, how practiced her sadness was. "Hey girls, how was school today?" Charlotte's face shuddered slightly. "We didn't go today. Mama wasn't feeling good." "Your mama's sick?" Robert felt alarm bells ringing in his head. "She gets better sometimes," Violet offered quietly. Then sick again. Robert wanted to ask more. Where was their father? Where did they live? Why were 3 6-year-olds navigating city streets alone? But something in Charlotte's posture told him the conversation was over. That evening, Trevor noticed them through the truck window as Robert picked him up from Mrs. Patterson's apartment. "Daddy, why are those girls always there?" His 8-year-old face was pressed against the glass, his expression troubled. Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I don't know, buddy. They look cold." "Yeah, they do." Trevor was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, Mama would have helped them. The words hit Robert like a punch to the gut. Jennifer. God, she would have already had those girls wrapped in blankets, fed them homemade soup, probably adopted them outright. She'd had a heart that couldn't ignore suffering, that expanded to embrace whoever needed embracing. "You're right," Robert said softly. She would have. That night, Trevor insisted on packing extra sandwiches from their dinner, peanut butter and jelly, their budget staple. "For the girls," he said simply, wrapping them carefully in plastic wrap like precious cargo. Robert watched his son's careful hands and felt something shift in his chest. Grief had been teaching Trevor the wrong lessons, that loss meant closing off, protecting what little you had left. But here Trevor was, choosing generosity instead, choosing to be like his mother. "You're a good kid, you know that?" Robert's voice was rough with emotion. Trevor shrugged, but his small smile said he understood. November arrived with teeth. The rain turned colder, meaner, and the triplets appeared with jackets that were little more than thin windbreakers. On the worst days, they shared a single coat among the three of them, taking turns wearing it in 15-minute rotations they'd apparently negotiated with the precision of contract lawyers. Robert couldn't sleep anymore. He'd lie awake in his small bedroom, staring at the ceiling, thinking about three little girls shivering somewhere in the dark, wondering if they'd had dinner, wondering why nobody else seemed to notice them, wondering what kind of mother let her children beg for food on street corners. Then he'd feel guilty for that last thought. He didn't know the whole story. He never did. But not knowing was becoming unbearable. "I'm going to buy them real coats," Robert announced to Mrs. Patterson one Saturday morning. His neighbor was watching Trevor while Robert worked a half shift, and he'd stopped by to drop off his son. Mrs. Patterson, who had been observing the situation with her own quiet concern, nodded slowly. "The thrift store on Hamilton has good winter gear, and before you worry about money, I have some set aside for my Social Security. Let me help. I can't—" "Robert Hayes, you've been shoveling my walk and fixing my leaky faucet for 2 years without accepting a dime. Let me do this." So that afternoon, Robert and Trevor spent 3 hours at Hamilton Thrift, selecting the warmest coats they could find. Trevor took the mission seriously, checking pockets, testing zippers, comparing insulation thickness like a tiny quality control inspector. "These ones, Dad," he said finally, holding up 3 puffy jackets in different colors, purple, red, and blue, "so they can pick their favorite colors." Robert had been saving that money for Trevor's birthday party next month. Nothing fancy, just pizza and a cake, maybe a small gift. But looking at his son's earnest face, at the genuine care in his eyes, Robert knew Jennifer was somehow still here, still teaching them both what really mattered. Perfect choice, buddy. When they presented the coats to the triplets the following Monday, Ruby actually cried. Not sad tears, joyful ones. She hugged the blue jacket to her chest like it was made of gold. "It's really for keeps?" she whispered. "Really for keeps," Robert confirmed, and felt his own eyes burning. Charlotte's face showed something Robert had never seen there before: vulnerability. The careful mask slipped, just for a moment, and he saw the scared little girl underneath all that premature responsibility. "Why are you being so nice to us?" she asked quietly. Robert knelt down to her level, rain soaking through his jeans. "Because you deserve nice. All kids do. Our mama says we shouldn't take things from strangers. Then I guess it's good we're not strangers anymore. I'm Robert, this is Trevor, and you're Charlotte, Violet, and Ruby. See? Friends." Charlotte studied him with those ancient eyes, weighing his words, searching for the catch. Finding none, she simply nodded, but she didn't offer any information about where they lived or why they were always on that corner. The walls stayed up. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in mid-November. The temperature had dropped into the 20s overnight, and when Robert drove past Palmer's grocery at dawn before his early shift, he saw them already there. At 6 in the morning. Huddled together for warmth in their new coats, yes, but still, 6 years old and on a street corner before sunrise. Something in Robert snapped. He pulled over, rolled down his window. "Girls, have you been out here all night?" Violet shook her head quickly. "No, Mr. Hayes, we came early today." "Why?" Silence, the kind that spoke volumes. Robert made a decision right there in his idling truck, with early morning frost forming on the windshield. He was going to find out what was happening, not to intrude, not to judge, but because these girls needed someone to actually see them, to acknowledge that whatever was happening wasn't okay. "I'm going to follow them," he told Mrs. Patterson that afternoon. She was watching Trevor after school, and Robert had taken a rare afternoon off, using a sick day he'd been saving. Mrs. Patterson, who had worked in social services for 30 years before retiring, didn't try to talk him out of it. "You do what you need to do, honey, but Robert, be prepared. Sometimes what we find is harder than what we imagined." "I know. And if it's what I think it might be, we'll need to be careful, strategic. The system doesn't always help the way we want it to." Robert nodded, understanding the warning.
Mrs. Patterson had seen good intentions destroy families, had watched bureaucracy trump common sense too many times. Whatever he found, he'd need to think carefully about next steps. "I'll call you after," he promised. "I'll keep Trevor happy and distracted. You take care."
The rain had returned, drumming against Robert's truck windshield in a steady rhythm that matched his anxious heartbeat. He'd parked half a block from Palmer's grocery, engine off, watching, waiting. 3:45 p.m. The triplets emerged from an alley, not from the direction of Riverside Elementary School where they should have been, but from somewhere deeper in the maze of side streets. They walked hand in hand, Charlotte in the middle as always, their new coats bright spots of color against the gray afternoon. Robert's stomach knotted. They hadn't been at school. Again. He waited until they were a block ahead before getting out of his truck and following on foot. The rain provided cover, gave him an excuse to keep his head down, his collar up. Just another person hurrying through bad weather. The girls walked with surprising purpose, their route clearly familiar. They took shortcuts through alleys Robert didn't even know existed, cut through vacant lots where weeds pushed through cracked concrete, navigated the city with the confidence of much older children. The neighborhood changed as they walked. The neat row houses of Maple Street gave way to run-down apartments with sagging porches. Then those gave way to boarded-up buildings tagged with graffiti, chain-link fences, broken streetlights. The few people Robert passed looked worn down by life, avoiding contact with practiced efficiency. 20 minutes, then 30. Robert's unease grew with every block. Finally, the girls turned toward what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. The building was massive, probably a factory once before manufacturing left town. Most of its windows were broken or covered with plywood. Rust stained its corrugated metal walls. No child should be anywhere near a place like this. Robert's heart hammered as he watched the triplets slip through a side door that hung slightly ajar. He counted to 300, his breath misting in the cold air, before approaching. The door creaked when he pushed it open. The sound echoed in a way that suggested vast interior space. Robert's eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness, and then he saw it, all of it. The warehouse wasn't abandoned. It was full of people. Robert stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. Dozens of makeshift living spaces stretched before him, cardboard boxes arranged like walls, old furniture creating living rooms, tattered sheets hung from ropes to form privacy dividers, camping stoves providing meager heat, children of various ages sitting on threadbare blankets, some doing homework, some just staring into space, adults with defeated expressions trying to maintain some semblance of order in the chaos, an entire community, living in a warehouse, invisible to everyone outside these walls. The smell hit him next. Unwashed bodies, dampness, mildew, desperation concentrated into breathable air. Robert's eyes watered, but he couldn't tell if it was from the smell or from the absolute heartbreak of what he was witnessing. A woman near the door looked up sharply, her expression instantly defensive. "You lost? I'm looking for—" Robert's voice cracked. "3 little girls. Triplets. They just came in here." The woman's face softened slightly. She pointed toward the back corner. "Angela's girls, back there, but maybe you should leave them be. They got enough trouble without strangers showing up." Robert nodded his thanks and moved deeper into the warehouse, stepping carefully over extension cords that snaked across the floor, around piles of belongings, past families who watched him with wary eyes. He heard a baby crying somewhere, heard someone coughing deep and wet, heard the quiet murmur of survival happening in the margins. And then he found them. The corner space was no bigger than a parking spot. A pile of blankets, a cardboard box serving as a table, a few plastic bags hanging from nails in the wall, probably containing their only possessions. The triplets were clustered around a woman lying on those blankets, and even from a distance, Robert could see she was ill, very ill. "Mama, we brought bread," Charlotte was saying, her small voice carrying across the space. "And Mr. Hayes gave us money yesterday, so we got the medicine from the pharmacy like you said, the cough syrup and the fever pills." The woman, Angela, coughed, a deep rattling sound that seemed to shake her entire frame. When she finally caught her breath, her voice was barely a whisper. "My good girls, such good, brave girls." Robert must have made a noise, a gasp maybe, or a choked sob, because all 4 heads turned toward him simultaneously. The triplets' faces registered shock, then fear. Charlotte moved instinctively in front of her sisters, protective even now. Angela tried to sit up, her arms trembling with the effort. Despite her obvious weakness, her expression turned fierce, maternal. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm Robert."
Robert Hayes, I've been helping your daughters, giving them food money. I just wanted to make sure they were safe. Safe? Angela's laugh turned into another coughing fit. When she recovered, there were tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. Does this look safe to you? But it's what I've got. It's all I can give them right now. Mama, don't cry, Ruby said softly, crawling closer to her mother. Mr. Hayes is nice. He bought us coats. Angela's eyes found the colorful jackets the girls were wearing, and something in her face crumpled. I'm sorry, she whispered, though Robert wasn't sure if she was talking to him or to her daughters. I'm so sorry. I'm trying. I just need a little more time to get better, to find work again, to... How long have you been here? Robert interrupted gently. Angela met his eyes. 4 months. Since July, when I lost our apartment. 4 months. 4 months of these babies living in a warehouse. 4 months of hunger and cold and fear.
What happened? Robert heard himself ask, and Angela's story came out in fragments, interrupted by coughing and exhaustion. She'd been a nurse, a good one, before she got sick. Pulmonary tuberculosis, the diagnosis said, probably contracted from a patient before she could get properly fitted for protective equipment. The treatment required months of medication and time off work she couldn't afford. Without income, the rent went unpaid. Eviction came faster than she'd believed possible. My family, we don't talk anymore. Haven't for years. Long story, old wounds. And their father? She shook her head. He left when they were babies, said 3 was too many, that he hadn't signed up for this. I've been on my own since they were 6 months old. What about social services, housing assistance? Angela's expression turned bitter. You know what happens when a sick single mother with no address reaches out for help. They see unfit. They see dangerous living conditions. They see 3 children who need to be removed for their own safety. Her voice dropped to a fierce whisper. They'll separate them. Foster care doesn't keep siblings together, especially not 3. I've heard the stories, seen it happen. My girls might end up in 3 different homes, 3 different schools. They might never see each other again. Charlotte had moved back to her mother's side, her small hand gripping Angela's. We stay together, she said firmly. Always. Robert looked at these 3 6-year-old girls who had learned to break granola bars into perfect thirds, who had learned to navigate city streets alone, who had learned that asking for help meant losing everything. He looked at their mother, who was slowly dying from an illness she'd contracted trying to save other people's lives, who was so desperate to keep her daughters together that she was willing to live in a warehouse and send them out to find food. He thought about Jennifer, about what she'd say if she were here. He thought about Trevor, safe and warm in Mrs. Patterson's apartment, blessed with security these girls had never known. He thought about the measure of a person, what they do when no one is watching, what they do when helping is hard. Something cracked open in Robert's chest, not breaking, expanding. You're all coming with me, he said, and his voice was steady, certain. What? No, I can't, Angela started. You're sick, really, truly sick. You need a hospital, real treatment, not pharmacy cough syrup. Your daughters need a safe place to sleep, regular meals, to just be children for a while. I have a spare room. It's small, but it's warm and dry. We'll figure out the rest later. You don't understand, Angela whispered desperately. If social services finds out, if anyone official knows, then we make sure you get better before anyone official needs to know anything, Robert interrupted. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, she's a retired social worker. She knows how the system works, how to navigate it properly. But first, you need treatment, real treatment, and your girls need safety. Please, let me help. Why? Angela's voice broke. Why would you do this? You don't even know us. Robert looked at Charlotte, Violet, and Ruby, 3 little girls who had never complained, never demanded, who had simply asked for food with the quiet dignity of those who expected nothing but hoped for something anyway. Because they deserve better than this, he said simply. Because you all do, and because I can help. Maybe that's enough reason. The triplets were watching him with those ancient eyes, and Robert saw something shift in their expressions. Not quite trust yet. Trust would take time, but maybe the beginning of hope. Angela looked at her daughters, at the thin faces and hopeful eyes, at the warehouse that surrounded them with its smell of despair. She looked at Robert, searching his face for deception, for the catch, for the hidden price. She must have found something there that convinced her, because she finally nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The logistics of that night remained a blur in Robert's memory afterward.
There was the careful walk back to his truck, Angela leaning heavily on his arm, the triplets hovering close like worried satellites. There was the phone call to Mrs. Patterson, her sharp intake of breath followed immediately by, "Bring them here, right now." Mrs. Patterson took one look at Angela's gray complexion and labored breathing and called her grandson without hesitation. Dr. Marcus Patterson worked at County General and owed his grandmother approximately 1,000,000 favors accumulated over a lifetime of her helping his patients navigate insurance nightmares and housing crises. By 9 p.m., Angela was admitted under a charity care program that Mrs. Patterson navigated with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years learning every loophole in the system. The tuberculosis was advanced, the attending physician said, but treatable with the right medication protocol and proper rest. "She's malnourished, probably anemic, and I'm seeing signs of pneumonia on top of the TB," Dr. Patterson told Robert quietly while Angela slept in her hospital bed. "Another month like this, and—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The triplets stayed at the hospital until visiting hours ended, reluctant to leave their mother's side. Charlotte held Angela's hand even while she slept. Violet sat perfectly still in a chair, watching every beep and blink of the monitors. Ruby curled up at the foot of the bed like a loyal puppy. "Girls," Robert said gently when the nurse finally insisted they had to go, "your mama needs rest to get better. We'll come back first thing tomorrow, I promise." "You promise?" Charlotte's voice was small, younger than he'd ever heard it. "I promise." Robert's spare room had been used for storage, boxes of Jennifer's things he couldn't quite bring himself to donate, old furniture, random accumulated junk of life. Trevor helped him clear it in 20 minutes flat, both of them working with the focused energy of mission-driven purpose. "They can have my room," Trevor announced when they finished. "It's bigger. They can share my bed and I'll sleep on the couch." "Buddy, you don't have to." "They need it more, Dad. Mama would say the same thing." Robert's throat tightened. "Yeah, she would." So the triplets moved into Trevor's room, staring at the actual bed with sheets and pillows like it was something from a fairy tale. Trevor showed them where he kept his books, explained that they could play with any of his toys, demonstrated how the nightlight worked. "Do we really get to stay here?" Ruby whispered to Robert while her sisters explored the closet with wide eyes. "As long as you need to," Robert confirmed. "And there's food, real food, tomorrow too?" Robert knelt down so he was eye level with her. "Ruby, there will be breakfast tomorrow, and lunch, and dinner, and breakfast the day after that, and the day after that. For as long as you're here, you won't go hungry, I promise you that." She stared at him for a long moment, then threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. Those first weeks were hard. 3 traumatized 6-year-olds didn't trust easily, didn't sleep through the night, hoarded food in their pillowcases and under their mattress until Robert gently explained that the pantry would always be full, that meals would always come. They flinched at raised voices. They apologized constantly for existing. They cried silently, without sound, as if they'd learned years ago that tears were a luxury that attracted unwanted attention. But slowly, gradually, Robert watched them transform. Color returned to their cheeks within 2 weeks. Their laughter, tentative and uncertain at first, became more frequent. Ruby started playing with Trevor's old stuffed animals with the wonder of a child discovering toys for the first time. Violet began drawing, pages and pages of pictures showing families and houses in the sunshine. Charlotte slowly, carefully started asking for things instead of just accepting whatever was offered. "Mr. Hayes," she said one morning at breakfast, Could we maybe have strawberries sometime? We had them once and they were really good." Robert's eyes burned. "I'll get some today." When he brought home a container of strawberries that afternoon, all 3 girls cried happy tears and ate them so slowly, savoring each bite with reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. Angela's recovery took months. The tuberculosis responded to treatment, but years of malnutrition and stress had taken their toll on her body. Mrs. Patterson worked tirelessly with her network of advocates and social workers to help Angela qualify for disability assistance while she recovered, to navigate housing support programs, to prepare the documentation for when she was healthy enough to work again. "The system is broken," Mrs. Patterson said more than once, frustrated after another day of bureaucratic hurdles. "But it's what we've got, so we learn how to make it work." Through it all, Robert's small apartment became a home for 7 instead of 2. Money was impossibly tight. Robert picked up every overtime shift the shop offered. His boss, when he heard the situation, started sending him home with damaged parts that were actually perfectly fine, things Robert could sell or use. The local church, once word spread through Mrs. Patterson's network, started delivering food boxes weekly. What struck Robert most was how people responded once they knew there was genuine need. His coworker Jake started bringing his kids outgrown clothes. The woman who ran the laundromat gave him free detergent. Trevor's teacher organized a fundraiser at school that raised $800. People were fundamentally good, Robert realized. They just needed to see where help was required. The breakthrough with the triplets came on a Sunday morning in late February. Robert was making pancakes, his and Trevor's weekend tradition, now expanded to include 3 more hungry mouths. Violet was setting the table with intense concentration. Ruby was trying to help Trevor fold napkins, though her attempts looked more like crumpled paper balls. Charlotte was sitting on the counter, watching Robert cook with that careful observation she applied to everything. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly. "Yes, sweetheart? Could we maybe call you something else? Mr. Hayes feels really far away." Robert's hand stilled on the spatula. "What would you like to call me?" Charlotte bit her lip, considering. "I don't know. What does Trevor call you?" "Dad, but you already have a mama, and that's—" "Could we call you Uncle Robert?" Charlotte interrupted. "Because you're like family now, but not replacing anyone, just adding." Robert had to turn away, pretending to check the pancakes so the girls wouldn't see his tears. "I would be honored if you called me Uncle Robert." "Okay, Uncle Robert." Charlotte tested the words, then smiled. A real, genuine, childlike smile. "I like it." By spring, Angela was healthy enough to start a part-time position at a community health clinic, a job Mrs. Patterson had helped her secure through connections, something flexible enough to accommodate her continuing recovery and doctor appointments. She'd gained weight, color had returned to her face, and she'd found a small apartment through a housing assistance program that would be ready in 2 months. "I don't know how to thank you," Angela said to Robert one evening. They were sitting on his small balcony while the kids played inside, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You don't need to thank me." "I do, though. You saved us. You saved my girls." Robert shook his head. "I think maybe we saved each other." Angela looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "When Jennifer died, I thought my heart just closed, like it couldn't hold anything new anymore, couldn't expand past the grief. I was just going through motions, working, taking care of Trevor, surviving, but not really living." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your daughters, your family, you reminded me that hearts don't actually work that way. They don't close off, they grow. Sometimes the most broken hearts become the biggest ones." Through the window, they could hear the children laughing. Trevor was teaching Ruby some kind of hand-clapping game, while Charlotte and Violet offered commentary and encouragement. Ordinary sounds, beautiful in their simplicity. "I spent 4 months thinking I was protecting my girls by keeping us hidden," Angela said softly, "thinking that was strength. But real strength is accepting help when you need it. You taught me that." "Your girls taught me something too," Robert replied. "They taught me how to notice, how to really see people instead of just looking past them. How many people walked by them every day and didn't stop? How many times was I that person before I finally paid attention?" He shook his head. "I don't want to be that person anymore." 6 months after that rainy November day when Robert followed 3 hungry girls to a warehouse, he stood in his kitchen making pancakes for breakfast. The apartment was full of noise and life and beautiful chaos. Angela emerged from the spare room, dressed for her shift at the clinic, looking healthier than Robert had imagined possible that first night. The girls were arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to pour juice. Trevor was teaching Ruby his napkin-folding technique with the patience of a natural teacher. Violet was drawing a picture of all of them at the table. Charlotte was reading aloud from a chapter book, her voice confident and clear. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust motes and golden beams and turning ordinary moments into something sacred. "Pancakes are ready," Robert called, and everyone surged toward the table with enthusiasm, talking over each other, reaching for syrup, complaining about sibling elbows and ribs, all the normal, wonderful messiness of family breakfast. Robert watched them all, his heart full to bursting. He'd followed 3 little girls expecting to find a simple problem with a simple solution. Instead, he'd found a family that needed saving, and discovered that in saving them, he'd somehow saved himself and Trevor too. His heart, which he'd thought grief had permanently damaged, had proven bigger than he'd known, big enough to hold his love for Jennifer alongside new love for these unexpected additions to his life, big enough to embrace both sorrow and joy, loss and gain, grief and gratitude all at once. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of noticing, of really seeing the hunger in a child's eyes and deciding that you cannot, will not simply walk past, of choosing to follow instead of ignore, of opening your door and your heart even when you think both are already too full. Robert had thought he was rescuing 3 little girls and their mother, but really, they'd all rescued each other.
If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to Everhart Tales and be part of our community. I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, that noticing matters, that kindness ripples outward, that broken hearts can hold more than we ever imagined, please share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. I'll see you in the next story.